Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 81 for the 10th of Adar Aleph in a leap year. And today we are going to be continuing with chapter 29 for Likutei Amarim. And today's episode is not going to be the most politically correct one, so you've been forewarned. We are going to be discussing why the very prevalent notion nowadays that we should just be ourselves and make no apologies for who we are and be authentic to ourselves is not necessarily the best advice, and it actually can be very detrimental to who we are. So to give a little bit of a cultural background to the current zeitgeist, here are a couple of examples of where we see this being portrayed. And there's a movie that I actually saw called The Greatest Showman, which has a song in it called This Is Me. It's a very popular movie. It's a very popular song. And I'm just going to read you some of the lyrics. I am who I'm meant to be. This is me. Look out, because here I come. And I'm marching on to the beat I drum. I'm not scared to be seen. I make no apologies. This is me. So on first glance, this sounds like a really nice idea, right? It's like, don't apologize for who you are. Don't let the bullies take you down. Make no excuses. Be true to yourself, right? Here's some more lyrics from a different song that gives a similar kind of message to it. This is from the movie Frozen, from the song Let It Go, where there's a lyric in there which says, no right, no wrong, no rules for me, I'm free. And this is kind of an extension of that same idea of that we really should not let anybody tell us what to do. We know the deepest answers deep inside of ourselves, and we should just be real and free and authentic and be who we really are. So what we will learn about in today's Tanya, that this is actually terrible advice, and this is not what we should be doing at all. And the reason why is because when we say be who you really are, this is not a very simple thing, first of all. So we've already learned in Tanya previously, if you recall, that we do not house just one soul, but we actually house two different souls. We have within us both a godly soul as well as an animal soul. And these souls are constantly at war with each other, competing for dominion within our bodies, and have extremely conflicting interests, extremely conflicting desires. And so when we say, be true to yourself, be your authentic self, which self are we talking about? Are we talking about the godly self, or are we talking about the animal self? And it's not always so clear which one is present and which one is speaking to us in the moment. And as we'll learn about today, if anything, if we want to really be honest with ourselves in terms of who we tend to identify with the most, who represents our self and our sense of self, is really more often than not our animal soul and not the godly soul. So there are some very special people, we call them tzaddikim, who do have a self-identification, which is their godly soul. That's who they identify with. And the animal soul is kind of like the secondary one because they have won over the animal soul within the body. However, for most of us, the vast majority of us, I'm going to take a really wild guess here and assume that whoever is listening to this podcast, this applies to you. It definitely applies to me as well. We have not won that war, and these two souls are still constantly at battle with each other. And if anything, the animal soul has a little bit more of an upper hand. So what this means is that the me, the ego, the part of me that I identify with, really over and above all else, is my animal soul. So if you think about this in a very practical way, just think about your daily life. What are the things that you tend to think about? Sure, there are moments when you philosophize and think about spirituality and God and all that kind of stuff. But really, the vast majority of your day probably involves things like you wake up in the morning, you feel sluggish, you feel tired. Oh, now you feel really thirsty. Now you feel really hungry. So you better go get something to eat. Oh, now you are feeling really irritated because you're feeling that scratch on your back and you can't quite get to it. And now you're feeling angry because you just spoke to somebody on the phone and they really pushed your buttons in the wrong way. So as you see, and so on and so forth, we go through our lives and we go through our days. And really, ultimately, the self that we identify with, really for the most part, is our animal soul, is the animal self. This isn't necessarily inherently a bad thing. There's a reason why God created us in such a way, but it is something to be aware of, and it is something to be conscious of, and to really come to this understanding of why when we say that we want to be the best that we can be and to serve God in the ultimate way possible, the way to get there is not through self-indulgence. It's not through being more and more and more of ourselves and being who we want to be. It's not through letting it go and proclaiming to the world, this is me with all of my flaws and foibles, and just accept me as I am, and here I am, and all of that stuff. It's actually totally not that at all. And so let's get straight into the Tanya and see what the Alter wants to say. And then I'm going to try to bring it back at the end and discuss this a little bit more. So just to bring this into context a little bit. So if you remember from last time, and again, go back and listen to yesterday's episode if you haven't already, we've been talking about this phenomenon that tends to happen to a good number of people often where, and this is talking not even about bad people necessarily. This is talking about even in the case of a Benoni. A Benoni is this person that we're all striving to be like, which is the person who never does anything wrong. They serve God completely. They never transgress any commandments, but it's still a struggle for them. And it's not something that necessarily comes easy for them. They still have negative impulses just like everybody else. So we talked about how for such a person, there may be times that they don't feel passionate about God. There's sort of like this blockage in their heart that's blocking them from feeling this passion while they are praying or while they are involved with different kinds of service of God. And so we already spoke yesterday about this idea that we liken this to wood. And we liken this to this idea that if you have a piece of wood and that slab of wood is not catching fire, one thing that you can do to have it catch fire is you break it apart, you splinter it. And we splinter that wood, you're creating space so that it's not as thick and it's not as coarse, and that allows for the fire to burn up. And this is similar to how we are. If we want the light of our soul to shine through, we actually need to take our body and our heart specifically, and we have to take the coarseness of the heart and the coarseness of the body, and we need to break it. We really need to break it down. And through breaking it, that's what's going to cause the light of the soul to shine in. And so today the Alter Rebbe is going to take this a little bit further and a little bit deeper. And so here's the continuation. So the Alter Rebbe says that the reason for the heart being so material and so coarse is the coarseness of the klipa. So remember we learned about klipa, so it's hard to continuously translate these terms, but the klipa is the husks that conceal godliness from being manifest in the world. So the coarseness of the klipa that elevates itself over the light of the holiness of the godly soul, this coarseness of the klipa is what conceals and hides the light of the godly soul. And so thus, for this, a person needs to crush it down and to bring it down into the dirt. Meaning, what does this mean? A person must set aside specific times to humble themselves, to see themselves as really lowly in their eyes, like really despicable and contemptible. And here the Alter Rebbe cites a verse from Tehillim, chapter 51:19, which he had actually already alluded to previously, if you go back a few episodes ago, where it says, V'lev nishbara, ruach nishbara. So that a broken heart leads to a broken spirit. And what is this spirit that we are breaking when we have a broken heart? This is the spirit of the sitra achra, of the other side, the side that conceals godliness. So this is, and what is this sitra achra? This is the man himself in the case of a Benoni. Because the animal soul, which is what gives vitality to the body, is in its full force like it was at birth, in the heart. And thus we find that since the animal soul is in its full force, like that in a person's heart, we call this, we identify so much with our heart in this way that this is what we call the man himself. The man himself, what is a man? A man is basically their animal soul. And when we talk about the godly soul, what do we say about the godly soul? We say, and we actually say this in a prayer every morning, we say, Elokai neshama shenatata bi teorahi. So if we break that down into English, it says, God, this neshama, this godly soul that you gave to me is pure. So then the Alter Rebbe specifies and says, look at that. It says here that you gave to me specifically. So who is Hashem giving it to? So Hashem, it means that there's this godly soul that's being given to the man. So meaning that the man himself is not this pure soul. Sorry to break it to you. We are not our pure soul. Our pure soul is something that is given to us. And rather, our true identification, who we truly identify with, is actually our animal soul. And then the Alter Rebbe says, so this is different in the case of tzaddikim, righteous people, that with them it's actually the opposite. That their godly soul, their pure soul, that this pure soul, which is the godly soul, this is who they really are, and their bodies are called flesh of man. So it's like for tzaddikim, they really identify first and foremost with their godly soul. So this is the end of the section here, and so just kind of to sum this up and just kind of explain this a little bit more. So this might sound kind of like depressing, kind of like confusing in a way, because you probably often heard this idea that really deep inside you, the truest you is God, and we're a piece of God. And we kind of hear this like inspirational stuff all the time. So this isn't to detract from that. The Alter Rebbe isn't saying that that's not true. But I think this is my own kind of understanding of what we're learning here. My personal understanding of it is, I think what the Alter Rebbe is trying to teach us is that the self that we really identify with, like sort of like our ego, we can call it, our sense of self as individuals kind of, is really more or less the animal soul. It's not the godly soul. When we talk about, I like chocolate, I like vanilla, I like ice skating, I like gymnastics, all these things that I like, and I'm talking about me personally and my likes, my dislikes, what I'm compelled to do, what I'm not compelled to do, all those things are really ultimately my animal soul. Sure, is there a relationship between the godly soul? Maybe, and that's a discussion for another time. But really what we want to really, the point that we want to bring in today is really the self that you identify with. And you can all think about this in your own way throughout your day. What are the things that tend to be on your mind on a day-to-day life being? Really do tend to be these very physical kind of things. And so when we recognize that, we can recognize the fact that this self that we identify with, who we really are in terms of this flesh and blood kind of thing, is not really a godly thing. It's an animal. And so it's not something that we should just celebrate and keep it as it is and be more and more and more and indulge in ourselves further and further and further. It's actually something that should be broken. And it's actually something that should be humbled. And we should take times, not all day long. We shouldn't be thinking about this and getting ourselves in this like depressed kind of state, but there should be moments that we sit down with ourselves and have kind of like a moment of confrontation and recognize this about ourselves, recognize who we really are, and kind of come to a state of humility in this way. And hopefully this state of humility will kind of break you in a certain sense. And there is something, as we've learned already, very useful and very healthy about being broken. And when we break ourselves in this way, as we've learned, what this ultimately does is it breaks these barriers that separate us from God, and it allows the light of God to come in. And so this is why, to bring it back to the song lyrics that I brought up in the beginning, this advice of being yourself, celebrating yourself, being your authentic self, everybody accepting my flaws as I am, it's not really the Tanya view. It's not really like, sure, we don't want to be walking around feeling despondent and ashamed of who we are. That's a different kind of thing. But at the same time, we don't want to flaunt all of our flaws and just accept ourselves as we are and indulge further and further in ourselves. That's not the purpose of life. And if anything, the purpose of life is actually to work on ourselves and to break ourselves in a certain sense and really make room within ourselves for this other godly soul to come in and and shine within us. So I hope that made sense to you guys, and I hope that was interesting. And we are going to continue along these lines tomorrow, and I will speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.